Thank you, Liz, again. That was inspiring. I want to be an entrepreneur. I am a product designer, so I mostly get the privilege with working with amazing, courageous entrepreneurs like Liz. That's what I do. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about minimum viable products. I talk a lot about this because my job is to be a designer and talk about user-centered design, but I actually think the two have a harmony together. When I first did this talk, I called it Lean UX, and I talked about this balancing line, but then I changed my mind. I think lean and inspiration and creativity are a harmony, and once you get into that rhythm of build, measure, learn, I actually think creativity loves constraint, and I'm sticking by it. And I'll tell you why. I have a few more case studies, like Liz's case study, of going from A to B and finding inspiration in all of those validations and finding inspiration in building the thing and pivoting and making it something different. Again, my name is Pam. I'm a product designer at Labs. I love design, and I love startups. And I think startups, seeing from one to the other, they all take different shapes and forms. So that's what I want to tell you today. A couple of different examples so you can start to get an idea and a picture and a visual story of what is minimum and viable. If I welcome all thoughts, supporters, or hecklers, bring it on. Talk to me on Twitter, Pam Dineva. That's not to say it's easy. Liz said it, Kent Beck said it. To solve a problem simply, gracefully, for only today's problems is actually really hard work. Picking the right set of features to test and learn from is really hard work. And that's why we're here. So first, I'm going to start with a story. This is a story told to me by Janice Frazier, Director of Innovation at Pivotal and Director of People now. And I think it's a really great visual metaphor for how to think about an MVP. Meet Pete and June. They're getting married. They're getting married in about 4 months, and as anyone who's ever planned a wedding, you probably know it is not entirely lean. There's a lot of planning and vision, and it starts with the head. Work ahead, lots of work. So June, a modern woman, starts planning for her wedding cake 4 months ahead of time. She finds inspiration, she searches the mood boards, she goes on Pinterest, she's found a vision. This is her vision. She's excited. I mean, just like an entrepreneur who's, created a baby and wants to go share it. She shows it to Pete and she says, Pete, I found her cake. We just have to find a caterer. What do you think? Pete takes a look at the cake, takes a look at June and says, June, I love you, but I cannot. This just isn't me. I'm sorry, I cannot. Lucky, June is a product manager. She knows what to do. She knows what to do with that feedback. So June starts small. She goes back to her home kitchen and she bakes a couple of cupcakes. She takes them to Pete and says, Pete, try Cupcake. What do you think? Pete takes one bite of the cupcake. He's delighted. He says, there's something almost spicy. Is it Madagascar vanilla? I mean, this is delicious. This is great. What do you think about how it looks? I don't know, June, it looks like something out of my grandmother's coffee table. I think she has these doilies that kind of look like that. It just does not, it's not me. Now, June has a little bit more information. She knows a little bit about Pete. So she goes back and makes another iteration. She makes a bigger cake. She takes away the flowers. I think it's probably the flowers that are not quite sitting well. But she keeps the inspiration and the vision, and she takes it back to Pete, and predictably, he loves the vanilla buttercream frosting. He says, this is interesting, but the pink, really? I mean, it's a wedding, why pink? Okay. So June has a little bit more information. She knows about Pete's taste. She knows what he likes about it, what he doesn't like about it. And she comes up with something new. She kept the texture and the taste and the buttercream, and she was inspired to create something modern. She takes it back to Pete. She says, what do you think? He loves it. He's delighted. He thinks it's sophisticated and it's them. And most importantly, it fits. He says, yes, this cake is us. June is so delighted. She lets Pete pick the wedding topper. It's probably a little joke. Anyway. So if you look at the vision, the point A to point B, it's hard to imagine point B. But that's the thing about exploration and discovery. It's the delight of finding something unexpected by learning along the way. Okay, all right, so we get the cake. It's a good metaphor, but what does a software MVP look like? How do I translate this into my business? Let's take a walk down memory lane, circa 2007. Remember Airbnb? Airbnb was started by a couple of designers who found out that during a design conference in San Francisco, there was absolutely no hotels left, and they said, what if we rent out our spare rooms and actually an air bed? Could that work? The biggest question they had in their minds was, will people go for it? Is anyone willing to go for it? And in 2007, this probably sounded insane and a little sketchy, just a little. And they did. They had 3 people stay at their home. Very diverse group of people, a woman from Boston and I think a father from Texas. Anyway, they validated that people were willing to sleep on an airbed and share it with strangers. And they went for it. And there was no fancy photography, but they had just enough to validate the market. I mean, it's kind of cute if you think about it. It's got a map and you see a little bit about the person who you're sharing a room with. Fast forward, circa 2013, a little bit later, they had learned that if they let people take their own photos, their homes are going to look like a scene out of Bates Motel, so we should probably get some professional photography. The biggest problem they had was this uncertainty of what is this place I'm going to stay at. So they started to, as they uncovered the market, they uncovered the problems with it too. And they learned from them, and the first thing they did is started to take the photos themselves. The founders went out and started to take the photography so they knew what they were looking for when they got professional photographers. But if you look at the web app, actually this is the mobile app, one of the first mobile apps, the iteration for this, everything else is pretty basic. It's got brilliant photography, but the iOS components are out of the box. In 2013, I used to use it as the poster child of this is what you get out of the box, nothing fancy with iOS. And you can have a web app ready to go, a mobile app. Fast forward just last year, they've evolved. They've built on that. There's custom photography that's consistent and beautiful. There's a whole rebrand. There's a culture around it, an emotional connection. This is more than just a place to stay. This is building a network. This is building community. And that's the big vision. But along the way, they experience the pain before solving the problem. There's a big question along the way. But how long do we wait to make it pretty and delightful? When does the delight come in? And the answer, like everything else in Lean, is, well, pretty enough to learn from. What's pretty enough? Well, if we think about it, the only thing we can learn from poorly designed products is that people don't like using poorly designed products. That's not that interesting in our learning. So it has to be just enough that we learn the big questions. When I was putting together this presentation, I Googled ugly cupcake. Because I wanted to prove that an MVP is just not just an ugly version of the real thing. And there seems to be this meme where, it's a muffin that's like not good enough and wants to be a cupcake, and everyone's like, no, you're just a muffin. Don't pretend to be a cupcake. Not viable is the point. Not viable. There's another visual representation that I like to think about, which is taking a slice out of a vision and thinking about each individual piece, which includes a little bit of delight and usable enough, and the bit of functionality that matters. So how do we slice the right MVP? It's about validation and the biggest questions that we have today. If the biggest question you have is about the market, then design to get to the market, to connect with them. If it's about the problem or the solution, there's ways around it. I think, Liz, you got very quickly to testing the solution, and that was the slice. Yeah. That was the most critical. Lean UX is about making decisions in the face of ambiguity. And constraining it gives us confidence to go out and discover in a very confined time, very confined scope, very confined budget, and learn something from it before taking a leap of faith into the vision. So I talked a little bit about constraint, and you might think, okay, a couple years is not a whole lot of constraint. So what happens when you have a week? I'll give you another case study, a very different shape and form of an MVP. I think late last year, the US FDA, Food and Drug Administration, open sourced their database, which includes all of that, warning labels and all that information that goes in the back of food and different prescription meds and everything else. And they said, agencies and third-party developers out there, you have a challenge. You have about a week to create value using this database. So Pivotal Labs took on this challenge in just under 5 days. And we started by brainstorming. We started by making the assumptions first because, well, constraint. Sometimes it's easier to use a tool, to use design as a tool to get validation. So we thought, well, sometimes it's a little tricky when you're taking two meds and how they interact with each other. We believe that's a problem. Let's solve it and let's test it. So very quickly, we created a simple solution. This was day one in the afternoon. Even when you've got a day, there's a scope that can work to answer the question of, are people having this problem? Because the biggest question was, okay, we believe it's a problem when two drugs interact with each other, but does anyone care? Or do you just take the two and hope for the best? I don't know, let's test this out. So by the end of day one, we had built something, and it was enough, right? It was accurate. It got clear feedback and clear call to action. Pretty maybe not, but it wasn't frightening like a medical website. It was inviting enough. Hey, it's a day. And then got some answers. Talked to a few folks and started to learn a little bit about it. And as it turns out, people do have this problem. Especially people with prescription meds for chronic medication do concern themselves about mixing two meds. But what was interesting is that it really didn't come up until they got a cold. When it comes to prescription meds, it turns out people are quite familiar because their doctors warn them and their pharmacists warn them and they know all about the warnings. But it gets crazy when they get a cold and all of a sudden they have to take Panadol or something with the over-the-counter. Then it gets frightening. And then they start Googling and get really lost in the medical language. And that was an interesting lens on the problem we thought they were having. Okay. So then we iterated a little bit. We built up the fidelity. We started to build around this idea that it's really two different sets of meds that people are taking. They have the chronic one, and then they have the over-the-counter. That's the new medicine into the cocktail. And we started to ask questions. We started to learn more about how they feel. And learned it's not just meds. It's like, okay, but can I have wine with it? I mean, I know wine's not good, but how bad? What's the severity? So the nuance and the way they're thinking about the problem led us to keep adding the functionality. By the end of day 5, we had a welcoming, inviting, friendly website that was usable. It let you type in medications. It didn't make you spell them because we also learned people have no clue how to spell meds. No idea. Retype them several times. We also observed people realizing they have more meds than they thought that, someone would type in like a aspirin or something and then think, oh, what about my allergy meds? Oh, I need to add one more. So reacting to all of those ideas, and also building up fidelity, you can tell it started to get more trustworthy looking. We even got to animations in 5 days because we thought they were important for, the loading times and the way that people interact with medical websites. And the question is, so what, it takes a week? No, we're never done. It's just the rhythm. And the rhythm just forces us to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, get comfortable with ambiguity, and go on to the next thing. Because as soon as we answer one question, we pose more questions, right? Is it a new market, a new segment, a new problem? I think if I were to go forward with SafeMeds, there's the big question of interpreting all the medical information and helping people make better decisions. But again, that's the next problem we can solve. And that is the journey. It's a circular journey. And we just keep asking more questions in the hopes of answering them. Thank you.